Have you ever noticed how some people test your limits quietly, deliberately? They don't yell or argue outright. Instead, they push small interruptions, delayed responses, backhanded compliments, watching how you react. Not out of concern, but to see how far they can go before you break. It's like tying a wild horse to a fence. At first, it stands firm, unshaken, but with every tug, every test of its patience, the real challenge emerges. Not for the rope, but for the horse. Will it break free? Will it react? Or will it stand so unmoved that the one pulling begins to feel the fear instead? That's how some people test your patience. They poke and prod, pretending it's nothing, waiting for you to snap. But in these moments, you have a choice. React and give them control, or remain still and remind them they never had it to begin with. Because when you stop defending your peace, they start questioning their chaos. If you find value in what we're discussing here, a simple, free way to support us is to hit that subscribe button and don't skip any part of the video. Each piece of information could be the key to unlocking deeper insights into human nature and your personal peace of mind. 1. They constantly interrupt you. At first, it seems like simple rudeness, but constant interruption, whether in casual conversations or serious discussions, is more than bad manners. It's a pattern, a test. You're speaking and they cut in. You're sharing an idea and they talk over you. Maybe you brush it off, assuming it wasn't intentional, but over time you realize it's not random. It happens every time. They dominate the space, leaving you unheard, unseen, dismissed. Here's the truth. People who constantly interrupt aren't just careless. They're showing you exactly how little they value your voice. And if you allow it, it continues. Not because you deserve it, but because you've unknowingly signaled that it's acceptable. Epictetus once said, "It is not the words of others, but our response to them that disturbs our peace." The interruption itself isn't the real problem, it's how much we let it affect us. The Stoic approach isn't to explode in anger or suffer in silence, but to set firm boundaries with self-respect. A woman I know, let's call her Natalie, worked on a team where one colleague always interrupted her in meetings. No matter how well prepared she was, he'd cut her off, derail her points, or finish her sentences. At first she ignored it, not wanting to seem confrontational. But when she realized it wasn't accidental, she took a different approach. The next time he interrupted, she calmly met his gaze and said, "I'm still speaking. Please let me finish." The room fell silent, and from that day forward, he never interrupted her again. So how do you handle this? Recognize it for what it is. Repeated interruption isn't a quirk, it's a pattern of disregard. Hold your ground. Don't match their rudeness, but don't shrink either. A calm, firm response is often more powerful than anger. Stop explaining yourself to those who aren't listening. At the end of the day, your words deserve space. Your voice deserves respect. If someone constantly cuts you off, they're not just interrupting your sentence, they're testing your limits. Show them where the line is, and don't hesitate to enforce it. Because real peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict, it comes from standing your ground in the middle of it. 2. They deliberately provoke you. Some people push buttons on purpose. They know exactly what triggers you. And instead of respecting your boundaries, they treat them like a game. They use sarcasm, mockery, or passive-aggressive jokes. Comments that seem harmless on the surface, but carry a sting underneath. And what's worse, they do it repeatedly. Not because it's innocent, but because they want to see how long you'll tolerate it before you snap. Here's the truth. This isn't casual teasing. It's calculated, a test. The moment you react, you play into their hands. Now, you're too sensitive, too emotional, or too reactive. They remain calm while you're left frustrated, misunderstood, and, worst of all, apologizing for simply having feelings. But this is where Stoic wisdom becomes a weapon. Marcus Aurelius said, "The greatest victory is not being provoked into anger." The Stoic doesn't let others dictate their emotional state. They don't take the bait, not because they're weak, but because they refuse to hand over control. They understand that reacting in anger gives the other person power, but responding with composure, that's the real dominance. Let me tell you a story. A man I know, we'll call him Omar, worked with someone who had a habit of making snide remarks. Never direct enough to call out, but always sharp enough to sting. Comments like, "Oh, I guess some people need more time to catch up," or "Not everyone's cut out for this pace." At first, Omar laughed it off. Sometimes he'd fire back with a clever jab of his own. How to handle people who test your patience, recognize it for what it is. Don't excuse it. If it keeps happening, it's not random. Don't react emotionally. The moment you let them pull you into an argument, you lose control. Respond with stillness, or simply walk away with dignity. You don't need to match their energy to prove your strength. People who provoke you thrive on chaos. But the Stoic doesn't fight to win an argument. They win by not engaging at all. When you stay calm in the face of provocation, you're not just showing patience, you're showing mastery, and that's a victory no one can take from you. 3. They ignore you on purpose. One of the most frustrating ways people test your patience, they ignore you, not loudly, not obviously, but intentionally. They leave your messages on read. They walk past you without acknowledgement. They pretend not to hear you, even though everyone knows they did. It's not forgetfulness. It's calculated silence. A subtle power play designed to make you feel uncertain, unimportant, or small. The truth about being ignored. This isn't about communication, it's about control. When someone deliberately ignores you, they're trying to shift the balance of power. They want to see how far they can push your patience. Will you chase? Will you over-explain? Will you apologize for something you didn't even do just to get a response? If they can get you to doubt yourself or second-guess your worth, they've already won. Because their goal isn't to talk, it's to get inside your head. But this is where Stoic wisdom becomes your shield. Seneca once said, "What others avoid in you is not your flaw, but their fear of being seen." Think about that. When someone ignores you on purpose, it's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their own insecurity. Silence isn't strength, it's fear disguised as confidence. And once you recognize that, you stop chasing people who try to punish you with it. A story about letting go. A woman I know, we'll call her Anna, had a close friend who suddenly started acting cold. No replies, no calls, just a silence. Whenever Anna tried to talk things out, her friend would shrug or change the subject. For weeks she kept reaching out, trying to fix whatever had gone wrong. The problem? She didn't even know what the issue was. Then one day she stopped. Not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but out of clarity. She realized that her patience was being used against her. This wasn't miscommunication, it was a silent strategy to test how long she'd tolerate being disrespected. And the moment she withdrew her energy, that same friend suddenly wanted to talk. But by then, Anna had learned, real relationships don't operate on silence and games. How to respond. When someone ignores you, don't chase them. That's exactly what they're waiting for. Don't let their silence define your self-worth. You're not invisible just because someone refuses to see you. Respond with quiet dignity, not by ignoring them back, but by stepping away from the game entirely. Because ignoring someone on purpose isn't power. It's immaturity disguised as control. And if someone is testing your patience with silence, the strongest response isn't noise, it's calm, confident detachment. A Stoic doesn't beg to be acknowledged. They know their worth, and that's the loudest thing you'll never need to say. How people test your boundaries and what to do about it. One of the most subtle ways people test your patience is by pushing your boundaries. It doesn't always come across as aggressive. It can be as simple as borrowing your things without asking, invading your personal space, or repeatedly bringing up topics you've made clear you don't want to discuss. When confronted, they might laugh it off, saying, "I was just joking," or "Don't be so serious." But make no mistake, this isn't just a misunderstanding, it's a test. When someone ignores a boundary you've set, they're not being forgetful. They're being intentional. They want to see how much you'll tolerate, whether your no actually means no. The more they get away with, the further they'll push, slowly chipping away at your self-respect until you begin to question whether your boundaries even matter. This isn't accidental. It's a pattern, a quiet but deliberate test of how far they can go before you finally push back. The Stoic approach to boundaries. Marcus Aurelius once said, "A boundary is not a wall, it is a sign of self-respect." In other words, setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out. It's about valuing yourself enough to protect your space, your peace, and your well-being. Stoicism teaches that boundaries aren't about aggression, they're about clarity. You don't have to overreact, but you also shouldn't remain silent. Take Zara, for example. She had a roommate who constantly disregarded her boundaries, taking her food without asking, playing loud music late at night, and inviting people over without notice. They might even exaggerate their closeness to you in public just to maintain an image. But if you call them out, they'll deflect. You're imagining things, or worse, I'm like this with everyone. This isn't just inconsistency, it's a mask. It's a quiet test to see how much you'll tolerate. They want you to focus on their public persona so that you ignore the private reality. They want you to doubt your own instincts, to second guess whether you're overreacting. They're hoping that as long as they treat you well in front of others, you'll keep tolerating the cold treatment behind closed doors. The Stoic perspective on authenticity. Seneca once said, "The character of a man is revealed not in words, but in contrast." In other words, true character isn't about how someone behaves when people are watching. It's about how they treat you when there's no audience. A Stoic doesn't get fooled by charm or outward appearances. They look for consistency. When someone's words and actions don't align, they don't ignore it or hope it'll change. They adjust their expectations accordingly. Consider Nyla. She was in a relationship with someone who barely acknowledged her in private. He rarely checked in on her, showed little interest in her feelings, and often acted like she was a burden. But around his friends, he was a different person, attentive, affectionate, even boastful about their relationship. At first she was confused. Was the public version of him his true self? But over time she realized a fundamental truth. Who someone is when no one's watching, that's who they really are. What to do when someone wears a mask. Pay attention to patterns. If someone's behavior shifts depending on who's around, don't ignore it. Trust your experience. If their private treatment of you doesn't match their public persona, believe what you see behind closed doors. Don't make excuses for them. If they wanted to treat you well, they would, regardless of the audience. At the end of the day, actions speak louder than appearances. A Stoic knows that respect, consistency, and authenticity aren't negotiable. And when someone keeps testing your patience, the best response isn't frustration, it's clarity. You see them for who they are and you act accordingly. Once she accepted the truth, she stopped settling for the act. So, how do you handle someone who acts one way in private and another in public? First, trust your personal experience. Public kindness doesn't erase private indifference. Second, don't let their performance distort your clarity. Third, don't make excuses for the contrast. If someone treats you well only when others are watching, they're not valuing you. They're using you to enhance their image. At the end of the day, real connection is steady. It doesn't shift based on the audience. If someone's public affection doesn't align with their private behavior, trust what you feel in the quiet moments. A Stoic doesn't chase appearances. They stand firm in truth. And the truth is, real character doesn't need a spotlight. Now, let's talk about one of the most draining behaviors you'll encounter, playing the victim. No matter what happens, it's never their fault. If they hurt someone, they were misunderstood. If they lie or disappoint, they were under pressure. If they cross a line, it's because someone else pushed them. They twist every situation to make themselves look like the one who suffered most, even when they cause the harm. The reality? This isn't about accountability. It's about escape. People who play the victim aren't seeking resolution. They're seeking permission to repeat the same mistakes without ever facing the consequences. And what makes it even more exhausting? They don't explode. They manipulate. They don't lash out. They drain you, slowly, subtly, with guilt, with excuses, with helplessness. Every time you try to address their behaviour, they twist the story until you're the one feeling guilty, until you're the one apologising. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes your guide. Marcus Aurelius once said, "He who always blames others has yet to master himself." A Stoic understands that true strength lies in ownership. While we can't control everything, we are fully responsible for our actions. People who constantly blame others for their behaviour haven't even started the journey inward, and until they do, they'll expect you to carry the emotional weight. They refuse to lift themselves. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Tariq, was in a relationship where every disagreement turned into a guilt trip. If he brought up an issue, his partner would break down, recount every past hardship, and say things like, "I guess I'm just never good enough for anyone." At first, Tariq felt bad. He'd back down, comfort her, and let the issue go. But it happened every time. Eventually, he realised this wasn't sensitivity, it was manipulation. She wasn't taking responsibility, she was testing how much emotional... It's not about connection, it's about control. And this is where Stoic philosophy gives you an edge. Epictetus said, "The wise man is like a rock. Insults crash upon him and fall silent." The Stoic isn't cold or indifferent, but they refuse to let others dictate their emotional state. When someone throws a verbal jab, the Stoic doesn't flinch. Not because they're numb, but because they know reacting gives away their power. Stillness, on the other hand, is strength. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Navide, had a relative who always brought up his past failures in public. Every family dinner turned into a subtle roast. "Remember when you started that business and lost money?" Classic Navide. "Still chasing those big dreams, huh?" Time to get real. At first, Navide got defensive. He tried to explain himself, but the more he reacted, the more the jabs kept coming. Then one day, he stopped. He just smiled, stayed silent, and shifted the conversation. No anger, no defense, just calm. And suddenly, the jabs lost their sting, because without a reaction, there was no game left to play. So how do you handle people who try to provoke you? Recognize the pattern. If someone always brings up what hurts you most, it's not an accident. Don't give them what they want. Stay calm. Breathe. Hold your ground in silence or with grace. Remove their access to your emotions, not by shutting down, but by refusing to let them control you. At the end of the day, someone who tries to provoke you is playing a game. They hope you won't notice. But the Stoic sees it for what it is and refuses to play. Because true strength isn't in how loud you respond, it's in how powerfully you remain unshaken.